Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The dining room of the Okafor mansion glittered with chandeliers and polished pride. Imported cutlery clinked against expensive china as Chief Sebastian Okafor presided at the head of the long table, regal in his igbata. His sons, Hugo and Chaik, laughed loudly, boasting about business deals they barely understood. Lady Margaret sat with her usual quiet dignity, sipping wine and pretending not to hear their subtle jabs at her only daughter, Igioma. But tonight, Igioma had chosen not to remain silent. At just 21, she was the most brilliant among them, a final-year engineering student with awards on her shelf and courage in her chest. She cleared her throat, stood tall, and announced calmly, "I'm pregnant." Silence crashed over the room. Her father's jaw stiffened. "With who?" he barked. "Emeka Naji," she replied. "He's a mechanic, but he's smart, and we love each other." In a split second, pride turned to wrath. Chief Okafor slammed his palm on the table, sending wine glasses flying. "You threw away your future for a common street boy? You dare stain my name with such filth?" The house that once applauded her became a court, and her father, judge, jury, and executioner. Within an hour, Igioma was standing outside the mansion gates, her belongings stuffed into a nylon bag like she was a servant caught stealing. The security guards who once greeted her with respect now refused to meet her eyes. Lady Margaret had followed her to the hallway, not to beg her husband, but to press an envelope into her hand, one filled with silence and cold stares. Igioma stood barefoot in the driveway, pregnant and disowned. The mansion lights glowed behind her like a mockery of the love she once knew. Her brothers stood at the balcony watching, not in shock, but with smug satisfaction. "At least now there's no competition," Chaik had whispered to Hugo. That night, the media would not report on Chief Okafor's perfect family portrait being ripped apart. But Igioma didn't need the world to know. Her heart had already felt the blade. She looked up at the sky, her eyes heavy, and whispered, "So this is how it ends?" But in truth, it was just beginning. She walked for miles, clutching her small bag and her bruised dignity. She had no money, no shelter, and no one she could trust. Her phone buzzed. Emeka had been trying to reach her all evening. She hadn't told him yet. Not how it happened. Not how ugly it got. She finally picked up, and hearing his voice, cracked her spirit. "Come to me," he said without hesitation. "You're not alone." His voice was her first warm embrace since that stormy dinner. She took a bus toward Emeka's part of town, heartbroken, but held up by a thin thread of hope. A mechanic's quarters was no place for a billionaire's daughter, but she no longer belonged in the world of chandeliers and silence. She belonged in a world where love mattered more than status. A world she was about to fight for, even if it meant losing everything. Emeka opened the door and immediately pulled her into his arms. His mechanic uniform smelled of grease and firewood, but it felt like safety. Igioma collapsed into him, sobbing without restraint. For the first time that night, someone held her without judgment. He led her into his tiny self-contained room, tucked behind his father's auto repair shed. It was dim, barely furnished, a thin mattress on the floor, a kerosene stove in the corner, and a small window that refused to close properly. But it was a haven. As she sat on the edge of the mattress, Emeka crouched in front of her, wiping her tears. "Igioma," he said softly, "I know what we are facing, but I swear to you, we'll get through it." She nodded weakly, unsure if the strength in his eyes could carry the weight of the shame now crushing her name. Still, she leaned on it. That night, the world outside went quiet, but the war inside her raged on. The next morning, Emeka introduced her to his father, a cold, stern man who looked at her swollen belly and scoffed. "You've ruined him," he said bluntly. "A man with potential. You couldn't find someone on your level." His words were daggers. Emeka tried to defend her, but it was no use. His family believed she had trapped him, tricked him, and now brought disgrace to their humble reputation. With no space in the main house and no welcome offered, Emeka fixed up an abandoned storehouse beside the shed for them to live in. It had no fan, no working bulb, no privacy. Rats occasionally scurried across the floorboards at night. Igioma, once accustomed to silk sheets and marble tiles, now shared a mattress on bare cement. But she didn't complain. She had chosen love. She had chosen truth. And now she had to live with the consequences. As days passed, their routine became survival. Emeka fixed cars by day, returning home with oil-stained hands and bruised arms. Igioma washed his clothes and sold fruits by the roadside to earn a little money. Their love became their currency, holding hands in silence, smiling through hunger, praying together before sleeping on an empty stomach. But whispers spread quickly. People mocked her openly. Billionaire's daughter now washing clothes, they'd say. All for love. Her back ached from sitting by the market gutter. Her feet swelled from walking long distances. Her body changed with pregnancy, but her spirit refused to die. Even Emeka sometimes cried in secret when she fell asleep. I failed her, he would whisper. But Igioma never blamed him. Her heart still believed in their future. She held his hand one night and said, "If our dreams die now, then we never truly lived." And so, together, they fought on. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, while the world was at church and Emeka was fixing a customer's car, Igioma noticed a small leather-bound notebook tucked inside one of Emeka's toolboxes. Curiosity led her to open it, and what she found inside took her breath away. It wasn't random scribbles or numbers. It was filled with meticulously sketched diagrams of car engines, design concepts for energy-efficient vehicles, notes on AI car diagnostics, and even app interface designs. Emeka, the man who had been called just mechanic, had the mind of an inventor. She sat on the floor and flipped through the pages, awestruck. There were notes written beside each drawing like, "For when we can afford it," or "This will help Nigerian taxis save fuel." He had vision, deep, intelligent, grounded vision. When Emeka returned and saw her holding the book, he froze. "I was going to show you someday," he said, "but I didn't think it mattered anymore." She rose and hugged him, holding the notebook to her chest like it was treasure. "It matters," she whispered. This is our future." That evening, they spread the notebook across the floor and began talking like dreamers again. Igioma offered ideas, how to pitch it, how to scale it, how to brand it. Emeka, though hesitant, began to believe in his own genius through her eyes. He confessed he'd always wanted to build an app that allowed local mechanics to diagnose cars with their phones. It could change lives, she told him. And they believed it. For a moment, the rats, the poverty, the ridicule, all faded. They were no longer two castaways. They were creators, builders, partners. That night, Igioma wrote 3 words on the last page of his notebook. "Daratech begins here." But reality didn't vanish just because they had a dream. Bills still piled up. Igioma's body grew heavier with pregnancy. Emeka's father became more hostile. And the market vendors now chased her from her usual spot because they said her pregnancy attracted bad luck. Still, every evening after chores, Igioma would sit under the flickering bulb, study Emeka's notebook, and write ideas into an old-school exercise book. She didn't know coding yet. She didn't have money. But she had vision, purpose, and something even stronger, faith. She looked at Emeka one night and said, "We may have nothing now, but I swear one day they'll know your name." He laughed softly and replied, "Ours, Igioma. They'll know ours." The storm came without warning, not in the skies, but in their lives. It was a Saturday evening, and Igioma had been boiling yam over a makeshift stove outside when she realized Emeka was taking too long to return from the market. He had gone to buy some palm oil and paracetamol for her growing headaches. As the clouds darkened and the first raindrops kissed the dusty compound, Igioma's unease grew into fear. Then her phone rang. It wasn't Emeka. It was a stranger, a bystander, a voice trembling on the other end. "Are you his wife? He's been hit. He's not moving." The pot of yam boiled over and fell to the ground, but she didn't even notice. She ran barefoot through the mud, her wrapper barely tied, heart pounding like war drums. When she reached the small, understaffed general hospital where the stranger had directed her, She found Emeka bloodied and unconscious, oxygen tubes shoved into his nose, and machines blinking with more questions than answers. "He's in a coma," the doctor said calmly, as if that word wouldn't shatter her soul. "We need N300,000 immediately to transfer him to a better facility, or he may not survive the night." The figure might as well have been N3 million. She had nothing. No savings, no relatives willing to help, no husband to speak for her. When she called Emeka's father, the response was cold, final. "He's dead, to me, already. Don't call again." That night, Ijeoma sat beside Emeka, held his hand, and made a decision. She would do everything humanly possible to keep him alive, even if it killed her. She sold her small fruit stall. She borrowed money from a loan shark with crushing interest. She gave up her mother's last piece of jewelry, a tiny gold chain, to a pawn shop. Then she signed an agreement with the hospital to work off the debt if she couldn't pay. No one told her this would be her new full-time life, attending to her unconscious partner, negotiating with nurses, buying medicine in pieces, and feeding herself from leftover hospital food. There were days she didn't eat, nights she barely slept, but she never stopped whispering to Emeka, "Come back to me, please come back." Some nurses began to pity her. Others mocked her behind her back. "Now love go kill this one," they'd say, washing coma man like he go say thank you. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Her pregnancy advanced, her body weakened, and her money vanished. She took up laundry for hospital staff, sweeping floors, and even cleaning the toilets just to earn small cash for food and medication. One afternoon, as she bent over scrubbing dried vomit from the corridor floor, two women who recognized her from the Okafor family gala walked by and burst into laughter. "Isn't that the billionaire's daughter?" one said. "Ah, see her life. See what love has reduced her to." Their voices cut deeper than blades, but Ijeoma didn't look up. She kept scrubbing, kept crying, kept praying. The humiliation no longer mattered. Only one thing did: Emeka's heartbeat on the monitor beside her. That soft, steady beep was the sound of unfinished promises, the symphony of a life she refused to give up on. As the world ridiculed her, she kept her eyes on her mission. Because behind every tear and every stain, there was still a future worth fighting for. The hospital bed that cradled Emeka during his coma also bore witness to the beginning of a new life. On a sweltering Wednesday afternoon, Ijeoma collapsed while scrubbing the hospital stairwell. Her water broke in front of everyone, nurses, cleaners, and a few judgmental patients who muttered she should have rested. They rushed her to the same ward she had visited every day for months. The irony didn't escape her. There, beneath the dim flicker of a faulty bulb, and without a single family member by her side, Ijeoma gave birth to a baby girl. The pain was excruciating, her body trembling with exhaustion, but the moment her daughter cried, a small, defiant wail, something shifted inside her. The nurses handed her the baby wrapped in an old blue cloth. She looked down and whispered, "Your name is Chidera, because what God has written, no one can erase." It was the most joyful moment of her life, yet also the loneliest. She spent the next 3 days on a rusted bed in the maternity ward. No visitors came, no flowers, no congratulations. But she didn't let that dim her spirit. With her baby resting on her chest, she hummed lullabies her mother used to sing when she was a child, songs that reminded her of warmth and home, even if her childhood home had now exiled her. She was discharged early due to hospital overcrowding. With no money left for transport, she wrapped her baby in a second-hand blanket and walked home under the burning sun, stopping every few minutes to catch her breath. That night, she sat beside Emeka's bed, holding her daughter on one side and his hand on the other, whispering to both, "You're all I have, but you're all I need." Caring for a baby while keeping a comatose man alive was more than just exhausting, it was brutal. Chidera cried often from hunger, but breast milk dried up faster when the mother barely ate. Ijeoma began working odd jobs in the hospital at night, wrapping the baby to her back with worn-out cloths, as she mopped corridors and cleaned wards. Sometimes, Dr. Amina would sneak her leftover bread and soft drinks. It wasn't enough. Ijeoma began borrowing small amounts from petty traders in the market to buy milk. The loan sharks started circling again. She began skipping meals entirely, feeding her baby first. Despite the pain, the mockery, and the fatigue, she smiled every time Chitara opened her eyes. She told her bedtime stories about a brilliant mechanic and a warrior woman who would one day build the future, even if the present looked like hell. Igioma's body was frail, her feet cracked, her eyes swollen from tears and sleep deprivation. But her heart? Her heart had never been stronger. It only took one photo to set the world ablaze. One morning, while washing blood-soiled hospital bedsheets with Chitara strapped to her back, a medical intern secretly snapped a picture. In it, Igioma was bent over a bucket, eyes tired, gown soaked in water, her baby peeking over her shoulder with innocent eyes. The caption read, "From billionaire's daughter to toilet cleaner, all in the name of love." Within hours, the image went viral. Social media went into a frenzy. Blogs ran headlines like Okafor's disgraced daughter living in squalor, and when rich girls fall for the wrong guy. Her father's name trended for 2 days, with many mocking him for raising a failure, and some even praising him for disowning her. Igioma saw the post when one of the nurses shoved the phone in her face with a smirk. She didn't say a word. She simply turned and continued rinsing the sheets. But inside, her chest burned with shame and quiet fury. Lady Margaret called that evening. It was the first time Igioma had heard her mother's voice in over 6 months. "Why didn't you tell me things were this bad?" her mother asked, her voice trembling. "Because you stood by and watched them throw me out," Igioma replied coldly. "Don't call me now, because the world saw what you pretended not to see." She hung up and cried afterward, not from pain, but because even in that moment, she still missed her mother, still longed for her father's pride. But what she longed for more was dignity, and she would earn it herself. The next day, she bought a cheap second-hand phone with the little savings she had and downloaded free coding tutorials from YouTube. She didn't know what she was doing yet, but she needed to learn something, anything, to change her fate. The mockery didn't end. Patients whispered. Hospital staff laughed behind her back. Some would purposely drop things just to watch her bend with her baby on her back and clean it up. Chitara fell ill one night from fever, and she had no money for proper medication. She stayed awake, pressing wet cloth on her baby's forehead and praying. "I'll get us out of here," she whispered over and over. "I'll build something from these ashes." What no one realized was that beneath the mop, beneath the sweat and swollen feet, lived a mind sharper than diamonds. A woman who had been crushed and abandoned, but was still standing, still fighting, still believing. Her silence was not weakness. It was the silence of someone planting roots in soil the world thought was barren. The world had mocked her, but they would soon remember her name, not as Chief Okafor's disgrace, but as the legacy he tried to erase. The day Igioma discovered the tech workshop was not planned. It was a divine accident, born from exhaustion and a leaking ceiling. After a grueling night cleaning the ER, she had gone to the nearby mechanic stall to wash Emika's uniforms. She stopped by a small tech office building to seek shelter from the sun, resting in the reception area. As she sat with Chitara asleep on her back, she overheard a woman speaking passionately in the next room about the power of local tech solutions. The woman, Miss Tenney, was hosting a free coding and digital skills workshop for beginners. Her voice was bold and inspiring, and every sentence ignited something long buried inside Igioma, a hunger not for wealth or status, but for knowledge. She peeked inside, saw young men scribbling notes, and quietly retreated. But something inside her whispered, This is where your future starts again." That night, she searched for free tech tutorials online using her cracked second-hand phone. She stayed up till morning watching videos on HTML and basic app wireframing while rocking her child gently to sleep. Over the following weeks, Igioma began sweeping the tech office floors for small money, offering to run errands just to be allowed near the class. She cleaned their restrooms, arranged chairs, and served snacks during sessions, anything to be in the room. Miss Tenney took notice of her quiet dedication. One day, as Igioma mopped the floor, the instructor called her over. "Have you ever coded before?" she asked. "No," Igioma replied, "but I've been watching from the hallway." Something about her humility and fire intrigued Miss Tenny. She offered Igioma a free spot in the workshop, on the condition she came on time and stayed consistent. From that day on, a new world unfolded. The numbers, lines, and syntax confused her at first, but it also excited her. In every algorithm, she saw a door out of poverty. In every interface, she imagined Emika's sketches coming alive. The other students mocked her age, her faded wrapper, the way she nursed her baby while typing. But she didn't care. She sat in the back, soaked in every lesson, and stayed after class asking questions. Every click on her laptop became an act of rebellion against the world that once laughed at her. She began building small wireframes based on Emika's designs, user-friendly, offline-compatible diagnostic tools for car owners and local mechanics. She named the folder Daratech Prototype, Draft 1. With Miss Tenny's guidance, she learned how to pitch her ideas, build mock-ups, and run simple tests. For the first time in years, she felt something more powerful than pain, purpose. She printed out her first pitch deck on borrowed paper, stuck the pages to the wall above Emika's hospital bed, and whispered, "We're not just surviving anymore, Emika, we're building." Some nights, she'd bring her laptop and place Emika's old notebook beside it, tracing every concept, merging his vision with her skill. Though he couldn't move or respond, she believed he could hear her. She kept speaking aloud as she worked, telling him every detail. "This screen will be your remote diagnostic tool," she'd say. "And this button here? This is where the world finds you." In a world that labeled her finished, Igioma had found her beginning. Despite the progress she made with her ideas and coding, Igioma's financial reality grew darker. The debt she owed the hospital had tripled due to accumulated interest, new tests, and emergency medications. Some of the nurses who once pitied her began to grow cold again, irritated by her inability to pay on time. The hospital's billing department issued constant threats. Emika would be moved to a lower ward, or worse, discharged to a care home if bills weren't cleared. But where would she take him? Their old room, beside the mechanic shed, had been taken over by squatters when she couldn't pay rent. The hospital was the only place he was safe. She made fresh rounds at the market, offering laundry services, dishwashing, floor scrubbing, anything. Still, it was barely enough to buy food for Chitara, much less settle hospital arrears. Yet, Igioma refused to stop her classes or abandon her prototype work. She juggled everything like a one-woman army, praying silently for just one open door. In the midst of this, Emika's father made a public statement in the community church, one that shattered Igioma to her core. "I buried my son the day he chose disgrace over greatness," he said, without a flinch. "That girl bewitched him, and now God has punished them both." The congregation gasped. Some nodded. Others pitied her from afar. The next Sunday, two women in the market, who overheard the comment, mocked her openly, asking her if she was selling cursed hands with her fruit. It took everything in her not to cry, not to fight back. That evening, she sat beside Emika and wept openly for the first time in weeks. "I know you can't hear me," she whispered, "but if you can, please wake up. Not for me. For her. For Chitara." Her tears fell onto his arm, which remained limp and still. But she still held his hand through the night, choosing hope over despair. Every day she remained at that hospital cost her more than money. It cost her dignity, energy, and time. But to her, he was worth it. One day, Dr. Amina found her slumped beside Emika's bed, dehydrated and weak. The kind doctor called her aside. "You can't keep living like this," she said gently. "You need rest. Food. You're a mother too." But Igioma shook her head. "If I rest, he might die. And if he dies, so does everything we've built." Amina offered her free counseling. Igioma politely declined. She didn't need therapy. She needed breakthrough. That same evening, Amina secretly arranged for Igioma to get small food packs from the hospital kitchen and arranged a place in the on-call room where she could nap between coding sessions. Igioma broke down in gratitude. "You're the first person who's helped me without asking me to give up," she said. In silence and debt, she pushed forward, tired, bruised, mocked, but never defeated. She wasn't just keeping Emeka alive anymore. She was keeping their legacy breathing. And soon, the world would know. It happened on an ordinary Thursday, the kind of day that began with spilled pap and broken flip-flops. Ijeoma had returned from the hospital's admin wing with another warning letter when she found Chidera playing on the floor of the tech center, flipping through a worn-out sketchbook. "What's this, Mummy?" the girl asked innocently. Ijeoma froze. It was Emeka's old notebook, the one filled with dreams and diagrams. Somehow, in the chaos of daily survival, she had buried it beneath stacks of dirty laundry and forgotten its weight. Sitting cross-legged on the floor, she flipped through the familiar pages again. Turbo engine designs, mobile diagnostic tools, low-cost car tracking systems for African roads. Her hands trembled. "This isn't just memory," she said aloud. "This is innovation, and I'll bring it to life." That moment marked a shift. Her grief gave way to resolve. She reopened her laptop, opened her code folder, and titled a new file, Deratech Rebirth. Working day and night, she began translating Emeka's pencil sketches into digital interfaces. The diagnostic app was the centerpiece, an offline tool for local mechanics to troubleshoot problems without expensive equipment. She integrated regional languages, voice prompts, and power-saving features. She poured every hour of pain into building it right. She shared mock-ups with Miss Tenney, who was stunned. "This isn't just good, this is disruptive," she said. Ijeoma didn't smile. "It's personal." With Miss Tenney's help, she applied for a local tech pitch competition under the alias Io Deratech. She kept her identity hidden, afraid the Okafor name might bring unwanted attention. Weeks later, she was selected as a finalist. The email arrived while she was feeding Chidera boiled yam on a bench outside the hospital. She read it aloud to Emeka, her voice trembling. "We made it. You and me, Emeka. Just like we dreamed." In the days that followed, she prepared like her life depended on it, because in many ways, it did. She borrowed a second-hand blazer, patched it herself, and typed out her presentation slides late at night in the hospital break room. She practiced her pitch with Chidera as her audience. "You see this button here?" she'd say, pointing at the mock app. "When your daddy wakes up, he'll press it and see everything you helped build." She taped pictures of the interface above Emeka's bed, so when he woke up, and she believed he would, he'd see what she built from his dream. Deratech wasn't just code or wires. It was blood, sweat, and tears in digital form. It was her way of saying, "You didn't die for nothing. I turned your silence into something louder than pain." And soon, the world would hear it. The venue was nothing extravagant. A converted warehouse with rows of plastic chairs, a shaky projector, and hand-painted signs that read Lagos Rising Tech Pitch, Final 10 Startups. But to Ijeoma, it felt like the biggest stage in the world. She stood backstage, heart pounding in her chest, wearing a navy blazer she had borrowed and tailored with safety pins. The name tag on her chest read IO, Deratech Innovations. She refused to use her full name. She didn't want anyone linking her to Okafor blood. Not yet. Her hands trembled as she clutched her pitch cards. This was her first time speaking in front of strangers about her dream, Emeka's dream. In the crowd sat investors, venture capitalists, media reporters, and unknowingly, her own brothers, Hugo and Chike, representing Okafor Holdings. They were scouting for cheap tech to acquire and gut. The moment she stepped onto the stage, Chike chuckled under his breath and leaned toward Hugo, whispering, "Another mechanic's girlfriend trying to be Zuckerberg." Ijeoma began to speak. At first, her voice shook, her palms sweaty. But as she walked them through Deratech, an AI-enhanced, offline vehicle diagnostic and repair app tailored for the African market, something shifted. She came alive. She demonstrated the UI she had designed from scratch, breaking down the logic of each module. She presented problems: poor road infrastructure, expensive diagnostics, lack of trained mechanics, and offered elegant, affordable solutions, all coded with minimal memory usage. The hall fell into deep silence. Then murmurs. Then questions. By the end of her 10-minute presentation, 3 panelists were nodding. One even stood up to ask, "Where did you learn this?" Her answer? The floor of a hospital. watching tutorials while cleaning bedsheets and breastfeeding. The audience didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but her eyes didn't flinch. Innovation isn't only born in labs or boardrooms. Sometimes it's born in grief. When she walked off the stage, Hugo muttered, "She's good." But Chipe dismissed her. "Still just a roadside talent. We'll poach her later." Later that evening, they announced the 3 winners. Igioma's name was called second. Her legs nearly gave out. She stood on the podium, blinking back tears, holding her certificate, her heart screaming, "Emeka, we did it." She didn't have an entourage. No corporate backers. No cameras flashing. Just one woman, one baby on her back, and a prototype built from broken dreams. Investors approached her afterward, but she declined them all politely. "I'll wait," she said. "The right partnership will come." On her way home, with her blazer folded over her arm and Chitara asleep against her chest, she passed by a large LED billboard that read, "Okafor Holdings, Innovation, Power, Legacy." She smiled grimly. Legacy? They had no idea what true legacy looked like. It wasn't inherited. It was earned in sweat, silence, and survival. And soon she would return, not as a daughter begging for place, but as a storm knocking at the gate. The knock on the hospital corridor door came just as Igioma was feeding Chitara mashed yam with shaky hands. She had barely eaten all day, and her daughter was sick with fever again. Igioma opened the door to find Lady Margaret, dressed in muted Ankara, her designer glasses resting on a trembling nose. The woman who once stood silent during her daughter's disowning now stood uncertain, holding a food flask in one hand and a handbag in the other. For a moment, Igioma didn't move. The sight of her mother stirred something confusing, longing wrapped in resentment. "What are you doing here?" Igioma asked quietly. Margaret stepped in timidly, scanning the cracked walls, the peeling paint, and the old bed where Emeka still lay unconscious, a thin oxygen tube in his nose. "I saw the viral video," she began. "I saw the tech presentation too. Someone sent it to me. You were impressive." Igioma cut in. "You could have said that 6 years ago." She turned her back and walked to her child. Margaret sat beside her slowly, placing the flask on the table. "I didn't come to justify anything," she said. I saw what you've become, and I wanted to say I'm sorry." Igioma chuckled bitterly. "Sorry for which part? For staying silent? For watching him throw me out? Or for not calling until the world saw me scrubbing toilets?" Her mother's eyes welled with tears. "I was afraid of losing everything, my home, your father's respect, our name." "And what about me?" Igioma snapped. "You didn't just lose a mansion. You lost your daughter." The room fell into heavy silence, broken only by the beep of Emeka's monitor. Then Margaret did something unexpected. She rose, walked to Emeka's bed, and gently touched his hand. "He's still handsome," she whispered. "Still full of dignity, even like this." Igioma turned away, not wanting her mother to see her tears. For the first time in years, the woman who raised her wasn't wearing pearls or perfume, just remorse. As Margaret stood to leave, she turned at the door. "If there's ever a day you can forgive me, I'll be waiting." Then she walked away, quietly, without fanfare. Igioma stared at the food flask, but didn't touch it. Her stomach ached, but her pride refused to open it. That night, she sat beside Emeka, tears falling freely. "You'd think I'd be happy she came," she whispered. "But it just made the hole deeper." Chitara whimpered in her sleep, and Igioma pulled her close. Her family was broken, fractured by silence, pride, and misplaced power. But she would build something better, something that couldn't be taken or bought. She would build a home from scratch, even if she had to do it with bleeding hands. As she kissed Emeka's forehead, she whispered, "I hope you're still fighting, love. Because I'm not giving up. Not now. Not ever." The invitation came in a cream-colored envelope, delivered by hand. At first, Igioma thought it was a threat or another medical bill. But inside was a formal letter, bearing the golden crest of Okafor Holdings. It read, "You are cordially invited to the Lagos Annual Tech Reimagine Conference as a featured guest and panelist. Your startup Daratech has been nominated for potential investment and strategic partnership. Her hands trembled as she read it. Her breath caught in her throat. She looked down at Chitara sleeping on her lap, and then to Emeka, still unresponsive, but alive. This is it, she said aloud. The door they locked. I'm about to walk through it, and they don't even know I'm the daughter they erased. She pressed the letter to her chest. There was no joy, just quiet resolve. She wouldn't go as Ijeoma Okafor. She'd go as Io, the founder of Daratech, the ghost they buried, the woman they'd soon regret underestimating. On the day of the conference, she wore a navy blue trouser suit, simple earrings, and her natural hair tied in a bun. Her posture was strong, chin slightly raised, eyes sharp. The auditorium was filled with press, tech executives, and industry giants. Okafor Holdings had a large banner at the front. Hugo and Chike sat on the stage, smug and confident, ready to present their crumbling company as evolving with the times. What they didn't know was that the woman listed last on the panel, Io Daratech, was their sister, the same one they mocked, the one they thought had vanished into shame. When her name was announced and she walked onto the stage, the silence in the room was deafening. Hugo blinked. Chike's jaw dropped. Chief Okafor, seated in the front row, looked as though he had seen a ghost. And in a way he had. Ijeoma spoke last. She walked to the podium and delivered a quiet but thunderous keynote. She didn't mention her family name. She spoke only of resilience, innovation, and the power of building from dust. She showed Daratech's journey, its functionality, and its impact. The crowd erupted in applause. Investors lined up afterward. One whispered, "Where have you been hiding?" She smiled and said, "Cleaning hospital floors and feeding my daughter." The irony was brutal. The same company that kicked her out now needed her ideas to survive. Okafor Holdings was on the verge of bankruptcy. Her brothers were looking for someone to save them. What they didn't know was that the woman they rejected was the only one who could. And as she looked them in the eye across that conference stage, she made a silent vow. This time, I'm not asking to be let in. I'm coming to take what was mine all along. The days that followed the tech conference moved with both chaos and clarity. Ijeoma's inbox was flooded with offers, interview requests, investment pitches, and meetings with venture capitalists who suddenly saw her as the next African disruptor. But beneath the praise and flashbulb attention was a dangerous web of manipulation. One foreign venture group, a prestigious name known for its global tech reach, offered her full funding, a lavish office in Lekki, media campaigns, and a multi-million-dollar seed grant. It sounded like everything she'd worked for. But buried within the contract was a trap. They would control 80% of Daratech, leaving her as little more than a glorified figurehead. At first, she considered it. She was tired of debt, of nights without sleep, of being mocked and underestimated. The offer came with promises of security for Chitara, proper medical support for Emeka, and wealth enough to finally silence her enemies. On paper, it was irresistible. But deep inside, something wrestled within her spirit, a familiar voice whispering, "Don't sell what you bled to build." Miss Tenney noticed the hesitation during one of their prep meetings. "You're uneasy," she observed. "Why?" Ijeoma sighed. "Because I've never had anything. And now that something has come, I'm scared of losing it if I say no." Tenney leaned forward and said, "The enemy of the poor isn't always poverty. Sometimes it's desperation. You built Daratech from heartbreak. Don't hand it to strangers because you're afraid." That night, Ijeoma couldn't sleep. She paced the corridor of the hospital with the contract in hand, staring at Emeka through the glass wall. His chest rose and fell slowly. His body looked frail, but his presence reminded her of how far they'd come. She thought of the nights she mopped floors, the morning she gave birth alone, the day she coded her first prototype. Was she really going to hand it over now, for comfort? "This isn't just a company," she whispered, tears falling. "It's the one thing in my life I built without permission." And yet, she didn't know what to do. The board at Daratech was pressuring her to sign. Investors were calling hourly. Everyone said it was a no-brainer. In her confusion, she found herself in the hospital chapel, kneeling beside Chitara, who had followed her in, half asleep. God, she whispered, I've come so far, but I don't know the next move. I've lost everything already. I can't afford to lose this too. Just then, her phone rang. The screen displayed Dr. Amina. At first, she thought it was another test result or payment reminder. But the voice on the other end said something she hadn't heard in years. He's awake. Ijeoma froze. What? Emeka, Amina repeated breathless. He woke up. Just now. He's calling your name. The contract slipped from her hands and hit the chapel floor. Everything else vanished. No deal. No pitch. No investor mattered more than that voice she had prayed to hear. She scooped Chitara in her arms and ran toward the ward, heart pounding, eyes already wet with tears of a resurrection she never stopped believing in. When Ijeoma reached the ICU ward, it felt like time itself stood still. She burst through the double doors, her legs barely able to carry her. Emeka lay there, propped up on pillows, pale but conscious. His eyes, those eyes she had stared at for years in stillness, were blinking, scanning the room until they locked onto hers. A tiny, cracked smile appeared on his lips. Ijeoma, he croaked, barely above a whisper. Her legs buckled, and she collapsed at his bedside, weeping into his arm, kissing his hand over and over. Chitara stood shyly by the door until Emeka looked at her. Come here, my star, he said, tears now streaming from his own eyes. The girl ran into his arms, and they wept together, three souls knit by suffering, finally sharing breath, presence, and memory again. Nurses gathered at the window, watching in awe. Even Dr. Amina stood in silence, a tissue pressed to her lips. No one could deny it. This was a miracle. Hours passed as they caught up, carefully, slowly. Emeka could barely speak without coughing, but every word mattered. He remembered parts of his coma, sounds, smells, her voice reading to him. I kept hearing you, he whispered. You didn't give up on me, did you? She shook her head, sobbing. Not even once. He asked about Chitara, about what she looked like as a baby, about the company, the dream, the sacrifices she made. She told him everything. The hospital cleaning jobs, the ridicule, the viral photo, the late-night coding, the competition, the investors. Then she mentioned the contract and fell silent. Emeka's eyes sharpened, despite his weakness. You were going to give them Daratek, he asked. She nodded. I thought it was the only way to save us. He gripped her hand with the little strength he had left and said, Don't sell our soul, because you're tired. Rest, but don't surrender. Promise me. The next day, still recovering, Emeka asked for a laptop. The hospital staff refused at first, but Dr. Amina intervened. If it helps his mental healing, let him do it, she said. Propped up in bed, Emeka reviewed the contract line by line. His analytical mind, so sharp even in weakness, spotted 5 traps Ijeoma had missed. They're not investing, he said. They're looting. Quietly. Legally. They spent 3 straight nights reworking the pitch deck, rewriting terms, and creating a new roadmap for a relaunch, one that would require no outside control. Emeka sketched again. Ijeoma coded. They worked like people who had nothing to lose and everything to prove. They were no longer building from ashes. They were rising as fire. And now, they weren't just surviving anymore. They were reclaiming. Together. The boardroom of Daratek was small but sacred, the place where Ijeoma had sat alone for years, making decisions from survival, not strategy. But now, Emeka sat beside her in a wheelchair, his face thinner but eyes sharp, dressed in a clean black shirt and gray trousers. He had shaved, looked human again, alive. The board members were stunned when she introduced him as co-founder and chief innovation officer. There were whispers of disbelief, a few uncomfortable looks, and one member even muttered, "We thought he was gone." Emeka chuckled softly. A lot of people thought that. But I heard everything. Every doubt, every insult, and every moment Ijeoma stood alone to protect what we built. He then displayed the revised product roadmap on the projector. The room went silent. It was genius, lean, local-focused, scalable, and independent of foreign control. When Ijeoma added, "And we'll be turning down the foreign offer," some gasped. But she stood firm. We're not here to make noise. We're here to make impact. Later that week, news broke across tech circles that Daratech had rejected a major international investment in favor of full African ownership. The story went viral. Ijeoma was called mad by some, visionary by others. But the respect? Unshakable. The media wanted interviews. Emeka's face was printed on flyers alongside hers as the comeback couple. Universities invited them to speak. Government officials asked to consult. Their app saw a 200% user spike overnight. But beneath the praise was the quiet pain of realization. How close she had come to giving it all away. One wrong signature and everything they had built, their pain, their story, their survival, would have been owned by strangers in suits. Ijeoma often stood in the middle of their small office, staring at the framed photo of their first pitch deck with tears in her eyes. I almost traded our history for convenience, she whispered one night to Emeka. But you came back right on time. That Friday, they walked into the Okafor Holdings building, not as beggars, but as bidders. They had scheduled a strategic acquisition meeting with the board to discuss potential collaboration, a move that could restructure the crumbling empire. Chief Okafor had no idea who he was about to face. Neither did Hugo or Chike. The receptionist blinked when Ijeoma gave her name. We're here to offer a solution, she said coolly. And this time, we're not here to ask for permission. As the elevator doors closed behind her and Emeka, Ijeoma looked at her reflection in the mirrored walls and smiled. Not the smile of vengeance, but of arrival. The daughter they cast aside was now the woman their survival depended on. And she wasn't coming with anger. She was coming with power. The boardroom of Okafor Holdings was sleek, towering, and intentionally intimidating. Walls lined with portraits of past chairmen, glass tables that reflected the polished shoes of those seated, and a silence thick with the air of power. It was a room meant to humble outsiders. But on this particular afternoon, the tension in the room did not belong to the guests. It belonged to the hosts. The board of directors sat nervously, half expecting a miracle, half expecting another PR disaster. At the far end of the table sat Chief Sebastian Okafor, older now, his skin looser, his eyes dimmer, but his pride still tightly wound like a coiled snake. Hugo and Chike whispered into each other's ears, oblivious of the storm that was about to walk in. Then the door opened, and in walked Ijeoma, flanked by Emeka in his wheelchair, laptop on his lap, briefcase in hand, and eyes sharper than they'd ever been. A gasp moved across the room like wind. Sebastian's jaw clenched, and Hugo shot up from his seat in disbelief. "What is this?" he barked. "Who allowed her in here?" "I was invited," Ijeoma replied coolly, sliding her presentation binder across the table. "You needed help. We came with solutions." Chike scoffed. "Solutions from the family disgrace and her mechanic husband." Emeka wheeled forward. "Correction, the coma survivor who co-designed the product, now saving your company from insolvency." He connected his laptop to the projector. What followed was nothing short of surgical. A 30-minute strategy session that unveiled Daratech's latest innovations, including their diagnostic AI app, a pending partnership with the Nigerian Ministry of Transport, and a pilot fleet for eco-tricycles already underway in Abuja. "What you're losing," Ijeoma said sharply, "is not money. It's relevance. And we can give it back to you, but only if this partnership is built on equality, not arrogance." The board members murmured, flipping through the proposal as reality set in. Their sons had failed. The empire was bleeding, and the daughter they discarded was offering not revenge, but redemption. Chief Okafor sat back, eyes never leaving his daughter. For the first time in his life, he was silent in a boardroom. No booming threats. No thunderous dismissal. Just silence. Ijeoma stood, gently closed her binder, and said, "We're not desperate for your brand. We are your future. If you want survival, you'll have to sign under our terms." Then she turned to leave. Emeka followed, wheeling himself with quiet strength. As the doors closed behind them, murmurs erupted across the table. One board member whispered, "They saved us, and we tried to bury them." And indeed, that was the truth. Daratech didn't come begging. They came delivering. And for the first time since its inception, Okafor Holdings needed someone more than it was needed. The comeback they never saw coming had arrived, not with vengeance, but with the sharp edge of earned power. It began with a single email, an internal audit flag raised by Daratech's forensic system, built quietly by Emeka while still recovering. The algorithm detected inconsistencies in offshore accounts tied to Okafor Holdings' procurement divisions, specifically departments managed by Hugo and Chike. Ijeoma didn't want to believe it at first. She thought maybe it was clerical error until the audit expanded, revealing a well-organized trail of embezzlement, ghost vendors, inflated invoices, and siphoned funds amounting to hundreds of millions. For years, the Okafor brothers had used their positions to launder company money, fund lavish vacations, and bribe political officials to cover their tracks. Emeka looked up from the spreadsheet and said quietly, "They didn't just ruin your name. They ruined your father's legacy too." Ijeoma sat in silence, her fingers trembling. It wasn't just greed. It was betrayal wrapped in entitlement. And the proof was all there, time-stamped and signed. The board meeting that followed was nothing short of an earthquake. Ijeoma, flanked by Emeka and their legal counsel, presented the findings with receipts, timelines, and bank statements. Hugo stood, shouting, "This is a setup. She's just bitter." Chike tried to storm out, but two plainclothes security officers were waiting by the door with a court injunction. The board members erupted, demanding accountability. Some directors resigned on the spot. Others wept openly. It was chaos. And through it all, Chief Okafor remained seated, his face pale, unmoving. For the first time, he saw what he had truly built. Not a legacy of leadership, but of corruption cloaked in family ties. His sons had dragged the company to the brink of collapse. And his daughter, the one he once called the shame of his name, was the only one who had the integrity and foresight to fix it. He didn't speak. He didn't protest. He simply lowered his head, a broken man in a collapsing kingdom. Within a week, Hugo and Chike were officially removed from the company. Their properties were seized pending investigation. Their names splashed across headlines: Sons of Empire. Okafor brothers face corruption probe. Daratech acquired full administrative control of Okafor Holdings, pending a total merger. Employees who had once mocked Ijeoma now greeted her with bows and whispered praise. Investors returned. Shares rose. The building buzzed again. But Ijeoma didn't celebrate with champagne or throw lavish parties. She walked into her father's office, once forbidden territory, and stood by the window, looking out over the city. Emeka joined her. "You did it," he said. She shook her head. "We did it." Then she turned and removed her father's nameplate from the desk, replacing it with one that read simply, Dara Holdings. Reimagining legacy. She wasn't just fixing what was broken. She was redefining what legacy meant. And this time, the throne wasn't inherited, it was earned. The media frenzy that followed was relentless. Interviews, exposés, think pieces. Everyone wanted to know how the disgraced daughter and the coma mechanic managed to rescue a drowning empire. Invitations poured in from across the continent. Keynote speeches, awards, panels on female leadership and resilience. But amidst the spotlight, a quiet knock came, not from press or politics, but from the two men who once called her a mistake. Chief Sebastian Okafor and Mr. Naji, Emeka's father, showed up unannounced at Dara Holdings headquarters. They sat in the reception room like strangers, holding their caps in their hands, shoulders slumped like schoolboys waiting for punishment. The staff didn't recognize them at first, stripped of their arrogance. They looked like relics of a world that no longer had power. It was the receptionist who whispered into the comms, "Madam, they're here. Your father and his." Ijeoma stood frozen in her glass-walled office, watching the camera feed. Emeka rolled beside her slowly. "Let them in," he said quietly. "Not for them. For us." When the two men entered, neither lifted their heads. Chief Okafor, once thunderous, now had the voice of a man walking through ash. "Ijeoma," he said, "you were right. I was wrong. I judged love as weakness. I mistook brilliance for betrayal. I shamed you and I'm sorry." His voice cracked. "You didn't disgrace this family. You saved it." Emeka's father followed, voice even softer. "I spoke curses over my own son. I called him a fool. But you're both everything I wasn't." For a moment, the room was silent. No claps. No applause. Just two fathers with empty hands and broken pride. Igioma's hands trembled. Her tears fell, not from weakness, but from release. She didn't reply at first. Instead, she handed each man a printed company brochure and said, "This is what we built while you turned your backs." She didn't forgive them that day. But she didn't condemn them either. She let them sit, listen, watch as Chidera entered the room with a sketch pad and ran into Emeka's lap, whispering ideas for a new app. She watched her father's eyes water as he realized the child he once tried to erase was now writing the future. "She'll carry this name," Igioma said softly. "Not because it's yours, but because we gave it new meaning." Her voice was calm, but full of power. She wasn't the girl begging to be seen. She was the woman they now had to reckon with. As the men left, heads bowed, Emeka held her hand and whispered, "Forgiveness is powerful, but proof is louder." And with that, the doors of the past finally began to close, not with vengeance, but with something far more dangerous. Legacy rewritten by those who refused to die in silence. Igioma stood alone in the boardroom after hours, the lights dimmed. The city lights of Lagos twinkling through the large glass windows. The meeting table was still cluttered with reports, mock-ups, and marketing strategies, but her mind was elsewhere. She stared at her reflection in the window and whispered, "You survived them all." The girl who was once dragged out of a mansion and into the gutters now stood at the helm of one of the most powerful hybrid tech empires in the country. But power hadn't corrupted her. It had refined her. She had become something her father never understood, not a pawn in a legacy, but the architect of a new one. Her silence had been her strategy. Her struggle had been her fuel. And her pain had become the blueprint. She walked to her desk drawer and pulled out the letter, the original foreign contract she almost signed, now shredded into 4 equal pieces. She placed them in a small glass frame, a reminder of the day she almost gave away her soul out of exhaustion. She didn't hang it on the wall. She hid it in her drawer. Some victories, she believed, were meant to be kept sacred. That weekend, Igioma was invited to give a TED Talk titled, "Choosing Yourself First." She stood on stage, elegant in a flowing emerald dress, Chidera watching from the front row with Emeka beside her. Cameras flashed, lights dimmed, and the room waited for a powerful story. But Igioma didn't talk about betrayal. She didn't talk about being disowned or mocked or nearly broken. She talked about the silence between her and her mirror. "The most dangerous battle," she said, "is not between you and the world, but between who they told you you were and who you are becoming." She spoke about redefining failure, about parenting in trauma, and about how she built an empire with one baby on her back and a notebook in her hand. Her voice never cracked. Her words never stuttered. She didn't preach revenge. She preached resilience. She didn't glorify suffering. She honored survival. When she finished, the applause rose like thunder, but she smiled softly, not for validation, but for closure. That night, while Emeka tucked Chidera into bed, Igioma stood on the balcony of their new home, a modest duplex, tastefully furnished but simple. She held a cup of tea and let the wind kiss her face. Emeka joined her, resting his arm around her waist. "You were incredible," he whispered. "You make peace look powerful." She leaned into him. "Because I had to choose myself before anyone else could understand me. Before the world applauded. I had to stand in the dark and applaud myself first." They stood there in silence, not as victims of a painful past, but as survivors who had turned wounds into wisdom. She wasn't waiting for apologies anymore. She had built her own table, cooked her own meal, and fed generations with the fruits of her pain. And in that moment, she knew the war was over, not because her enemies were defeated, but because she had nothing left to prove. The launch event of Dara Holdings was unlike anything Lagos had ever seen. It wasn't just a business event. It was a cultural moment. The grand ballroom at the Civic Center sparkled with white and gold, but the energy in the air was what truly lit the room. Journalists from international outlets lined the walls. Tech giants from Silicon Valley flew in. Nigerian governors and ministers sat on the front row. And at the center of it all stood Ijeoma Okafor, no longer hidden behind initials, no longer the disowned daughter, but the face of Africa's first female-led automotive tech empire. The merger between Daratech and Okafor Holdings was complete, not as a handover, but as a rebirth. On the banners behind her was the new slogan, Reimagining Legacy. Led by grace, built by fire. When she took the stage, the applause was deafening. She raised her hand gently to silence it. "We are not here because we were given chances," she began, "but because we made them. This isn't the legacy I inherited. It's the legacy I reclaimed." Then she paused and did something no one expected. She invited Emeka and Chidera to the stage. Emeka walked, no longer in a wheelchair, the result of months of therapy, sacrifice, and sheer will. Chidera held both her parents' hands, and the crowd gave a standing ovation. Ijeoma smiled, then turned to a reserved seat in the front row, a seat that now held Chief Okafor and Mr. Naji, dressed in simple agbadas, faces filled with visible humility. They stood and clapped, not as kings, but as witnesses to a woman they had once discarded. Her father nodded, pride mixed with guilt swimming in his eyes. She met his gaze, no hatred, no smugness, just calm. He would never regain the position he once held in her heart, but he had been allowed a seat in the room where her greatness was finally honored. And that was more than most fathers who had failed so deeply would ever receive. The night ended not with a party, but with a quiet moment. Ijeoma stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the skyline. Emeka joined her, his hand now steady, his steps sure. "So what now?" he asked. She turned and smiled. "Now we build not for applause, but for purpose. Not to silence them, but to uplift the ones coming behind." Chidera ran to them with her sketchpad. "I have an idea," she beamed. Ijeoma knelt, kissed her daughter's forehead, and whispered, "Then let's create it together." In that room, surrounded by what was once broken, now made whole, the true meaning of legacy was reborn. Not in inheritance, not in wealth, not in names, but in courage. In choosing to rise, when the world told you to stay buried. In choosing to rebuild, not just for revenge, but for redemption. And as the lights dimmed and the cameras flashed one last time, Ijeoma smiled, not because her journey ended, but because it had only just begun. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.